Well, over the last several years, we've seen the closings of local newspapers across the country, leaving local communities with limited access to information about what's going on in their hometowns. As this consolidation of media is happening, it appears that people are becoming more polarized politically. Carolee McGrath sat down with Scott Blinder, assistant professor of political science at UMass Amherst, to find out more about this trend.
With local papers, they're having trouble keeping the doors open. Since about 2004, we've lost 20% or so of the local newspapers that were in existence at that time, which adds up to about 1,800 newspapers closing in a 15-year period.
So what does that mean as far as how people, view the news and how they're voting?
Well, what it means for how they view the news is that they're losing a source that kept them connected to their local community, and increasingly substituting for that national level news. And we know what our national level politics and discourse is like right now, and so this is having a further sort of polarizing effect on the electorate. And the specific finding that some scholars from LSU and, I like to give credit, Dara Dunaway and HIT, found is an increase a decrease in split ticket voting, which is an indicator of rising partisanship, right? Because if you split your ticket, that means you vote for one party for president and a different party for Senate or Congress or some other race. So people who do that are less sort of dedicated partisans, less committed to one side or the other, and so a decrease in that, which they have linked back to this trend in decline in local news, is another symptom of our increasing divisions.
And when you look at, newspapers, kids today, they don't even know what that is, right? Everything is on your phone, everything is digital. How much is, like Facebook and all this other social media playing into perhaps the loss of interest in local news?
Well, this is something that we're wrestling with all the time. One thing that you hear is that it lets us retreat into our own partisan bubbles. There's some evidence that we do that, but some evidence that we don't, that actually we get those posts from our uncle across the country and do get exposed to different viewpoints. But it's more the internet as a whole makes the economic model of the newspaper really difficult to sustain. And the reason for that is newspapers work by bundling all the types of information that you might want into one package, and there was nowhere else to go, right? So you got the news, but you also got the sports scores and the classified ads, all levels of news in one almost monopoly package. Now you can get all that stuff for free, sort of a la carte, the second that you want it. And so it's harder to get the audience in that will sustain the deeper investigative reporting that we really value in local newspapers, and which we don't get so much from the Facebook post or the blog or the internet click.
And what do you think the way is out of this, or do you think this is just going to be something that fades into the background eventually?
I think it's really difficult unless people invest public resources, and that can come in a couple of different forms. Our country, relative to the rest of the sort of advanced industrial world, is really sort of all in on the media as a private marketplace, right? And in other countries, the way they fight this off is by actual public investment in public broadcasters.
But if
which
nobody
of course,
wants to read it, then why invest in it? Why invest public funds into something that people just don't want?
Well, it's not necessarily that they don't want it, it's that they won't pay for it, right?
Which means they don't want it, because if they wanted it, they would pay for it.
Well, they're not paying to click on weather.com or ESPN, right? I mean, there is a demand side issue as well, but I think we need to, and certainly for some people, the availability of all this entertainment means that they will simply opt out the news. And that's a problem as well. That's a problem of political engagement and who's participating and who isn't. But I think we have another problem on the supply side, which is even people who are hungry for this type of news can't get it, right? And that creates further problems. It creates polarization. It creates opportunities for corruption. It makes it more difficult to hold local as well as national officials accountable for what they're doing.
So you think publicly funding newspapers? Is that what you're saying?
Public funding is an option. It's usually more for broadcast media, actually, throughout Europe than for newspapers. But there are some interesting initiatives that involve foundations getting involved as well. So it doesn't have to come from the government, but it's got to come from somewhere where there are resources and people willing to, and institutions willing to invest to provide this good that the free market is lagging, is failing to provide, even to the degree that I think people would want and also need it.
Would you encourage students? I know that you're a professor, to go into this field anymore. I mean, when they say, "Hey, I really want to be a reporter," well, what do you tell them?
It's difficult. I tell them, same if they tell me they want to be a professor, that it's not quite the job market that it used to be. It is difficult, but at the same time, I do think I have some optimism that we're surrounded by information. We're consuming information all the time, right? And in that sense, more than ever, it's just what type of information. And so some optimism that there's always going to be some desire for this, and we're going to find a way through. But hopefully it'll be, again, media is a flowering, growing industry. It's just whether we can get the type of actual news reporting that we need to sustain a political community. So it may be that if you go into journalism, you end up writing clickbait and gossip columns and things like that, that people do read, but that don't sustain our democracy in the same way.
And I think people are also pretty skeptical of the news as well. We were talking about things being very partisan. A lot of people will say it's very much to the right. Some people. Other people say, wait a minute, it's way to the left, and they start to tune out, and then maybe even view local news the same way. How do you help viewers, to be attracted to, these important stories?
I think that is one of the things that's alienating about the national level discourse. It's incredibly polarizing, and you either get angry at the other side, or for people who aren't so much on Team Red or Team Blue, they often withdraw because the whole thing seems so unpleasant. And that's something that was different about local news. And sure, there are clashes and conflicts, but maybe more around more of a sense of shared goals, like if there's a controversy over a new park or a school development project, right? At least it's not quite so partisan ideological. And so that's one of the mechanisms behind this shift. When people are fed this national level diet, it furthers that divide. And another trend here is in local television news. Not so much that stations are failing and closing, but they're fed content by big corporations that focus them on the same national level stories. And that's not something that people have really asked for in their viewing habits. It's something that's come out of the current political and business climate, but that feeds the same trend. We're not getting the local stories that can maybe take some of the heat and the ideology out of our public discourse.